Hey, so this video is for a game design class. I just wanted to show you the beginnings of using the Animator to show more movement or interactive scenarios to get your ideas across in your prototype with minimal code. So I'm just going to click play in this scene, and I just mapped the A key and the space key to some different behaviors of this sphere. So the A key kind of moves it to a different position, but it's doing its default behavior. Think of this back and forth as like an idle animation. I just pieced together something super quick just as a reference. So it looks like, this character or this entity or whatever has this default animation, and as we press the A key, we switch between different positions or states that it could be in, but it stays in the default state, the idling back and forth or bouncing motion. And then if you press the space bar, it kind of goes off to the side and stays still. So this was only animating the position. In fact, if you look in the top right there, you can see the position numbers changing. And this is incorporating player input into changing different animation states. So this is a very interesting, vital skill set for prototyping. You'll make use of this too a lot in straight up game development. You just have to be careful what you change and manipulate, which parameters you change directly with code and which you're changing with the animator, because you can't change the same parameter both with code and animation. Only one system will override the other. So usually what happens is you'll take a nested object that has many children objects, and you'll you'll control everything at the root with code, and then you can just change different states of the children objects based on moving into different animation states and changing all of its. You can change different shaders and colors, position, rotation, scaling. You can turn stuff on and off. And so anything you do with 3D, you can do with 2D, with the user interface, or with 2D graphics, or with lights, or with objects. Like, you can get a lot of your idea expressed just with like some basic primitives and some user interface and using the animation system. So I just wanted to kind of introduce this scene to you and show it to you before I kind of take it apart piece by piece. I'm going to have to delve into a few more topics later on, but hopefully you can see that you can turn on and off multiple objects. You can swipe them. So kind of like how my user interface was moving and stuff was turning on and off, moving from state to state. You can also do that with an animator if the code isn't making sense to you. Maybe this is another technique that'll help you express yourself more. So what I will do before I unclick play is I'm going to show you the animator that's playing on this sphere. And notice this blue line is it's moving through the animation and just looping. It's over and over and over again. It's in state 1. I press space bar, it goes to state 2, back to state 1. Press the A key, it moves up to state 3. And it stays there in a repeating looping animation. You press space bar, and it can move down to its own little minor state. It's just a duplicate of the state too. Notice it goes to the same location. You don't have to, this is a state machine. So in animation, it's in code. You can see it like basically my user interface with that huge switch statement and those enumerations. That is, or if I used integers or enumerations at this point, I don't remember. But that is the idea of a state machine. You're always moving from one state to the next based on conditions that change. So in an animation system, it's that idea is very useful as well. So each of these nodes you can think of as a state. We have an entry point, so we click play. We must go to somewhere. So that's why we start at state 1, and then these are transitions that only if a certain condition is met will we move to here. And to leave, in this case, this has to be an exit time. I'll cover this all in more detail, but notice there's transitions all over the place. in different states. So altogether, we have a state machine that, based on what happens with these parameters, that we switch our states. So notice I'm just manually turning on and off these parameters. In this case, these are called triggers, very similar to a Boolean. And I'll cover this all one by one. But I'm just kind of diving in a little deeper, showing you the different parts. Notice how the state machine, I'm not pressing the keys on my keyboard. I'm actually turning these parameters on and off. And there's a very small script later on I'll show you that just connects the user input to these different parameters that we can turn them on and off. So we enter and we never leave. And it gets more complicated. Like game characters have massive animator controllers. They're just tens and tens, even hundreds of states. And we're not doing anything crazy. I just want you to be able to try to express yourself more with the final project. So I have to talk about layers. Nope. You can layer stuff up and it's more complicated. Don't worry about it. We just need to know about parameters, and we have each of the animations here. So I'll cover all this now. Just unclick play. So I just created a new scene. All I did was place a sphere in there. I just called the new scene 04 animation controller in case I wanted to connect it up to the other scenes. The sphere has all the default parts to it. Eventually, an animator and a little script I made gets assigned to it, but we'll do that when we get to it. But it's just a default sphere up here. You can make any of these. You can make nestings of them. If you know what prefabs are, you can build something a little more complicated. You can bring in free stuff from the asset store. So all I did was create an animation folder, right-click, create an animator controller. Once I did that, all I named it was sphere. Notice how I click on it. This is a little icon. There's the icon for state machine, and it's a controller. These ended up being my animations, are the different states that we can move between. So once the animator gets created, it's going to be empty. So let me create a new one. Create sphere 2. And I'm going to go up here and I'm going to remove this animator and I'm going to add this new one. All right, this new one is empty. This is what it looks like a default state. I press play. And nothing's happening. So, first step. Click over to animation. All right. It says that we have no clips, no animation clips. This is a timeline. To start, let's create an animation. So this is the easiest method, and I'll show you in a minute why. Let's create. So we're going to call it Sphere 02, and I'll call it State 01 or whatever, idle. Whatever you're trying to, I can say idle 01, doesn't matter. I would just call them states because behind the scenes are just states. But whatever you're trying to express in your animation, you make it a descriptive name. So now the timeline is active. All right, click Add Property. Notice all of these are components that are over here. So this is all the stuff that you can animate. But you have to open them up, and whatever are exposed, either public variables or serialized field private variables, what have you, these are exposed. So I was messing with the position. So I'm going to say I wish to animate on the sphere's transform position. Now it drops, these little diamonds are keys. They drop them down at time 0 and time 1 for a 1 second animation. Usually that's good for starting off. So let's say that I'm going to show how a character moves through like a maze level or something. All right, let me position my scene camera. So if the camera's there, this should be good. Yep. Let's say our character starts in the top of the maze, and I'm going to show it moving around in like a ball game. So at time 0, he's at the start of the maze, wherever that is. I just moved it. Now I hit this record button. That was important to note. Let me unclick that. You can move this thing around, it won't record. So while you have your animation open, you have the object selected, click record here, and it's the quickest way to just start moving stuff around. First, you select the time. All right, so I selected here at time 0, he's going to be there. Let's say at a half second in. Let's do the bouncing thing again. So he moves in, and if you scrub the timeline in, and then this key was originally set at the world space 0, so we have to go to this key and then move them back up to some place that we were about. So let's say about there. All right, so now we have 3 keys, 1 to 2, and then 2 to 3. So let's click play, and this is what it looks like. Yeah, it's not perfect. It's slow. It's at an angle. There's a little pop. There's a lot about animation to how to finesse it, make it look good. You can go into these curves to understand them. I'm not going to do it in this class, so it's a bit much. Maybe over the coming weeks, if I find that the learning curve's okay, I'll do it. But, you know, you can always stop it and move to a certain key and be like, oh, that's a little bit off. Let's move there, click record. Let's just move them down a little bit. And this was off by a little bit. I'll move it there for key. I wasn't on key 1. Nope. So I just added a key I didn't mean to. Let me delete that. Go back to time 1. Move it a little bit. Okay, press play. Sure. Looks like this key's down a little bit. Move it up. All right, sure. It's good enough. So it's a little slow, so I can show you, oh, if you select all of these keys, they turn blue, and then they have these little handles. And if you move it, it's like a scaling tool. So notice that the whole animation will be shrunk down, and the middle section of the keys is moving to make sure it's centered up. You can grab one section of key and just move it too by itself if you wish to. But I wanted to grab them all and scale them. All right, and then if I click play, there you go, it's a little faster. There's my little idling, he's bouncing. When our gravity is not down, negative y, our gravity is actually negative x. So we're in sideways world. Sure, that's my idea. I'm explaining it. It'll be explained in the tutorial, and now I'm building the animations to reinforce my ideas. All right, so notice I'm going to unclick the record button. So notice how we actually have a state created. First state, entry point goes to it. Awesome. And I click on the state. Don't be confused with the state in the controller and the actual motion, the actual animation file that is here. So if you just did it the process I did, go into animation window and create a new animation, it'll create the state for you in the animator. So it kind of gets rid of a lot of monotonous work. So just do this process. You don't have to create your states by yourself. All right, let's go back to the animation window. Create new clip. I'm just going to steal some of this name. Let's call it our second idle. All right, I'm going to actually go to my first idle, and let's see. You actually can copy these keys across. So if I take this and Control C and move over here and Control V, notice the position property came along, and then all the keys came. Otherwise, you can just add property and do it all manually again. But in this case, I'm going to do an idle, turn on my record button. But he's going to be at the next part of the maze. Let's just say, after I've been explaining a few things and you solve something, we get to move down into the next part of the maze. So since these keys are up here, it's kind of a messy thing. So I'm just going to copy these keys, Control C, Control V, and then Control V. So when you want a loopable animation, you want your start and your end point to be like the same. Now the midpoint just comes down a little bit because I want a bouncer. Now notice since I copied my first key into my last key, that the first key and the last key are exactly the same. Notice how the bouncing animation is a lot more smoother. I didn't have to like manually move it around and finesse it like I was and try to like guesstimate the other one. So usually what I'll do is I'll take that start key, copy it to wherever the end of the animation. If it's too slow, too fast, you just select all your keys and scale it up or down. And the mid key, notice I just slid along the red arrows like a perfect alignment. Not moving off that axis, just moving up and down. So this bounce actually looks a lot better. Great. So now we're in a new idle, a new part of the maze that the ball got to once we do something. That's amazing. And if I go to the animator, now we have 2 idles. All right. So if I right click on the first one and say make transition, we have a transition line. And right click and make transition back. You know, sometimes you want one-way streets, sometimes you want two-way streets. So how you build your transition is very important. So in this case, it's a two-way street. We have a transition back and forth. We're not stuck over here, but sometimes you want that. So now we have to define the transitions. When you click on the turn blue, it looks like this. So first off, click over here on parameters. List is empty. Click plus. We have some primitive variables that we can make use of. Float, int, bool, trigger. Float, decimal number, int, integer, bool, true or false. For animations, notice that there's a trigger, which is probably maybe the first time you've seen that. Or maybe if you've messed around with physics colliders, you notice that you can turn them on as triggers. So a trigger is really useful. It's like a one-way bool. A bool can be true or false and go back and forth. A trigger is like a bool is always false, and the moment that you trigger it, that you hit it, you can't set it to like, oh, my new bool variable is either true or false. A trigger, you don't set it to true or false. You trigger it, and it's like an instant, just a quick pop from like false to true, and then it's back to false. So a lot of times you want to do that with a bool. You just want to trigger it, and then you want to move it back. So it's like a shorthand way of using a bool in this quick bool situation as a trigger. I want to trigger this transition, right? I don't want to have to like say, okay, the bool is true, and then in the condition list, right, when the bool is true, then we can move in the trigger. Just say whenever this is triggered, whenever this variable pops. It's just a real quick shorthand way of bool for this situation. So I want to trigger. We're going from idle 1 to idle 2. So whatever makes sense naming wise, I'll just say, you know, oh, the user completed task 1 or whatever. He can move to task 2, right? Trigger, boom. So now we have to actually set this trigger variable over to the transition. It's selected. Here it is here, right? So by default, transitions can have exit time, meaning you play through the animation. Once it's done, it transitions. So if I click play and leave this as a timer based, notice that it's moving. That's actually a really cool animation. That's very cool. I might leave that and move that on, just so maybe you might have a use for this. But basically what's happening is this transition is timer based. This one is timer based. So it plays idle 1, and based on this drop off, we're this far into idle 1 animation, we have to start transitioning over this period of time to idle 2. And then idle 2, if I click on this transition, it's the exact same. It's just idle 2. Halfway through, it looks like we start to transition to idle 1. And so look, it's in this constant going back and forth between idle 1 and idle 2. Boom, 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 boom. Because both of these transitions are timer based, has exit time is turned on. So that was a happy coincidence, but that's not what I meant to do. So I want to turn off have exit time and say only when this is triggered, completed task 1, then are we allowed to transition to our second idle. Now if I have another trigger and say, oh, once you complete task 2, you can return back to task 1. Maybe it is a very simple version. You're going to want a few more, but this transition arrow this way, turn off exit time and set it to completed task 2. Now I click play. Nothing's happening. It's just repeating. It's looping and it's idle 1. But if I click or trigger this, boom, he flies over there. Trigger back, trigger back, trigger back, trigger, 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 and so on. All right? So you have some animations that have transitions that are being triggered by this parameter. But I have to actually like manually click in the parameters that's for testing. Like you click and play and you're testing your animator. That's great. It works really well. Wonderful. But we need to trigger it with user input. Or maybe you have a larger state machine. Right, and it's like sometimes some of these animations are triggered by user input, sometimes they're triggered by timers, sometimes they're triggered that, oh, we reached the 3rd stage of our tutorial, I wish to change everything and make them animate like this. Whatever it is that you're trying to explain. I'm just trying to give you the tools to open up your explanation methods. So let's create a new script. It's empty. Go up to the sphere. All right, here's the inspector. I already had this controller on it. I created the script. I'm going to remove it. I'm going to put on Animator controller 2. Oh, that didn't go so well. Let's try that again. Awesome. Script attached to object. Let's look at the script. Empty script. Okay. First thing, we want to know about our animator, right? So this will be a variable called Animator. You can call it whatever you want. I call it sphere controller, whatever name makes sense to you. Now, there's a few ways to grab this. You can make it a serialized field and save it and let it compile. And when you do, it's saying, okay, it's now expressed through the inspector. It's still private, but it's expressed through the inspector saying, tell me who this animator is. Well, I really want this one here, right? So I drag this object onto it. So this is one way to say, whenever I reference this animator, I'm really talking about this one here. That's great. Now, another way is that's sometimes useful is if you know it's always going to be on the same object, you say in the start method or the awake method, you could say get component of type animator. So this is going to, let me say sphere controller equals get component animator, right? So this will say when this script first starts, go get the component on this game object. You can reference other game objects, but when it's just get component, it's like saying, oops, it's like saying self.getComponent. Like saying this game object that I'm referencing. I guess self doesn't work anymore. Let's look at a quick fix. I haven't used this convention in a few years. Looks like they're getting rid of this idea. So you just say get component, right? It just says look at this game object, go through its components here, and go find me the animator. All right, sphere controller, this variable equals I need a reference. I need to know which animator I'm talking about. Go get the component on this game object that's in my game scene. Go get the one that's of type animator and get a reference to it. Now that I have a reference to it, I can use it. So what can we do? If input dot get key down. All right, so these are for keyboard keys. You saw that mouse. You can use mouse touch events. You can even map to game controllers and anything you want. When you use keyboard keys, you have to say key code. So it's an enumeration. Notice when I hit the dot key, it gives me a whole list of everything I want. All right. So let's just say when I press the A key. Now let's just say when I press 1. Let's say alpha 1, I think, is the one key that's above the alphabet section. Yeah. So there's get key down, get key up. Get key down is only true if I hover. It says it returns a bool. This whole thing is only true when I first press the one key that's above the alphabet section on the keyboard. That means I can execute the code because it's within an if statement. Get key up is only true when I release the key. Get key is like rapid fire. It keeps it true as you hold down the key. So for whatever the user input situation you need, you'd use that. So if I press the 1 key, I want to go tell the animator. Usually with the animator, I have set bool, set float, set integer, and set trigger. That's all you really need for the basics of this all. And there's 2 ways to call it. Pass in an int ID or pass in the string, the name. So let's pass in the name. I'm just going to do an empty string for now because I don't remember what I called it. Okay, copy my parameter name. Usually I'll copy it because it's case sensitive. So when I press the 1 key, let's set the trigger from going from 1 to 2. So you really have to be aware of what your triggers are doing. I'm going to copy this, and then we can do a check if you press the 2 key. Let's go from 2 to 1. Save it. Let it compile. All right. I'm going to press, I haven't saved it in a while. I don't want to crash. Let's play the game. We're stuck in idle. Press 1 key. We jump to task 2, stage 2, part 2, whatever. I'm pressing the 2 key and I jump back. So I'm pressing the 2 key right now a lot. Nothing's happening. Press the 1 key. So this is the one thing with triggers. Notice as I press the 2 key, notice it's triggered down here. So it's kind of already set. So once I press 1, you'll go 1, 2 real fast. So just be aware of that with triggers. Sometimes you can, there's also a command to wipe out triggers. So actually what I was saying before, it looks like they don't instantly pop back. I thought triggers pop back. But it looks like they hold in their new state. Anyway, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. Now the interesting thing is, since if I remove this, if I put on this new animator, the old one, pop it in there, and if I just put on my old animator controller, notice I have 2 of them. I'm just gonna, when you turn off an animator, a script like that, I should say, that the update part of it doesn't run. So this won't check for input. So I'm just gonna go back to my old one, which I think was A in spacebar. I'll jump to the animator. So spacebar does this thing, the super high jump, if you want to show that, whatever. Super high jump, then whoop, maybe you know, the gravity switched, and you can still show like super high jump. But there's 4 states, and there's 2 parameters. So this one needs the minor, what's called minor, to come into, and notice that it's time-based. It just comes right back out. Same with this one. Minor needs to be triggered to go in, and time-based to go out. And then this is just major either way. So the A key was major. I just saw like a major event and a minor event. But whatever. It's a completely different animator, but it was, and it runs on the sphere as well. There's a little catches, but most of the time, if you're animating on the same type of object, you can swap out animators like that. All right. So I just wanted to show you how easy it was to swap over. And in this case, it's a completely different animator giving you different behavior to show off. So hopefully that was interesting enough to make you dive into animators and the animation window in a very light script just to get some user input to change the different states of the animation. And this will start to open you up to some new ideas.